So here we are with another one of my summer shorts, a short subject, a short video, but a very, very critical, perhaps crucial lesson when it comes to the subject of the Christian faith and the basis for the Christian faith. Because today what I want to talk about is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And there probably is no more critical subject than whether the resurrection was an actual historical event, whether Jesus of Nazareth, after having been crucified on what we celebrate as Good Friday, on the third day, on that first Easter morning, rose bodily and physically from the grave. So I want to spend a few minutes to talk about that and to present some what I believe to be some compelling evidence for why we can believe that in fact it was a physical historical event. So, so let's dive into it. Let's talk about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And again, I'm not going to be able to get into an exhaustive exploration of it. I've taught lessons on this in the past that have been an hour or more long. I'm going to limit this to 15 or 20 minutes. So I'm not going to be able to get into all the details, particularly when it comes to the skeptics and the different theories that are thrown out there to explain it, to explain the empty tomb or the claims and experiences of the apostles and the disciples and so forth. I would certainly encourage you to look into that further if you have questions about it. And as I said, I have previous lessons that I've taught about it. But I'm going to at least broach the subject, I think, enough that you will have enough evidence in your tool bag, basically, to lean on either for your own edification or for others. Here is the Apostle Paul writing in his first letter to the church in Corinth, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Now, if Christ is preached that he has been raised from the dead, how do some among you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there is no resurrection of the dead, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is vain and your faith is also in vain. And I think that is true, that if Jesus Christ was not physically and bodily resurrected from the dead, if he was not seen alive after he had been crucified, dead, and buried, then in fact, what hope do we really have? Um, uh, what assurance do we have? What great hope do we have? Because at the end of the day, Christ described as the first fruits, the first one resurrected from the dead, so to speak. That was the stamp of approval, if you will, the validation of what was accomplished on the cross when he was raised from the dead, to validate who he actually was, God incarnate, God in the flesh, God who actually came and presented himself as our substitute to pay the penalty of our sins. So that's basically what Paul is saying, and I believe what he's saying wholeheartedly. Gary Habermas is, I think, one of, if not the most uh, authoritative scholars, teachers, and so forth on the resurrection. He has written extensively on it. He has spoken extensively on it. He's actually in the process of producing a 4-volume, what you might call an opus, on the resurrection. I think he's finished the first 2 volumes. At the end, it's going to be more than 1,000 pages, basically, of the evidence for the resurrection. Now, this is obviously just a brief video, I think maybe 5 minutes. So it's not an exhaustive examination or exploration of the resurrection. But once again, if your appetite is whetted, I would encourage you to look up Gary Habermas and his writings or his videos on YouTube and so forth to learn much more than I'm going to have time to present to you today.
Wix.
On the evidence in support of the resurrection. These are facts, these are historical facts, and this is what you specialize in. So,
I start with what I call a minimal facts argument. It's a species of reliability, one of the reliability arguments, but where most reliability arguments are top-down arguments. If the book is reliable, it's like an umbrella. Everything under it gets kept, from the rain. If the book is generally true, whatever's reported under it is accurate. Mine's a bottom up, and instead of an umbrella, I would suggest an example of a brick wall with individual facts being bricks that we put together to build a case from the bottom up. And I've used anywhere from 3 to 7 over the years. Lately, I've been doing 6. And I would say Jesus died by crucifixion. His disciples had experiences that they believed were appearances of the risen Jesus. Because of their belief that he was raised, it is the event that has turned the world upside down religiously. In fact, a recent book on non-believing Jews and the resurrection, they even acknowledge, not being Christians, that Christianity is a resurrection religion. It was the resurrection that powered the religion, powered the teachings, even to the point of being willing to die. And we do have first century sources for arguably the 3 largest names in Christianity. 4, very important, it was proclaimed very early. And today, critics, the consensus position is that you can track the resurrection preaching back to immediately after the cross. In fact, the way it's often stated by, say, Bart Ehrman, is that when Paul said yes to Jesus on the way to Damascus, there was already a body of data called the early creeds that are later written in the New Testament, but they were already being noised abroad. When Paul said yes, there were these heavy creeds, about 80% of which are in the deity, death, resurrection of Jesus, because that's a major message. They were already in existence. So when Paul didn't invent Christianity, the main reason, when he came to Christ, the message he hated most, we already have data from that 2-year period before Paul. And then the last 2 would be individuals, James, the brother of Jesus, and Paul, both of whom become Christians because they believed they had experiences which were appearances of the risen Jesus. Those are the 6 I would use. And to my knowledge, I've had dialogues with atheists, agnostics, scholars, specialists, and they don't dispute any of those.
So how do they respond to this? That you have these facts and you establish them historically, and you say the best explanation of these facts is that God raised Jesus from the dead, right? And there are these existing naturalistic attempts of explaining away these facts.
Yeah.
What is the best one to your knowledge, and then why do you think that it fails?
Someone just asked me that yesterday, and I made the point. You'd expect me to say this, but years ago, I would have told you the one that I thought was the hardest answer. Today, I would say, not only are there no good ones, there are no good theories that you can really take and ride to the bank, so to speak. If you're a naturalist, you can really take care of the resurrection with this. But the critics have generally given up espousing these theories. I did an article some years ago where I argued that less than 25% of the critics in the last 25 years, about less than 25% use the naturalistic theories anymore. They will usually say something like this. Yeah, facts are good. I don't agree. It's your idea is the only way to go. But, you've got an evidence case. And if you pushed them a little bit and said, well, what keeps you from believing this stuff yourself?
Can I guess?
So good. Go ahead.
Hume.
Well, Hume, but I think generally they'll say, I just don't want to believe.
Really?
And they will say miracles don't happen, and that say that they know you're ready. They don't often want to take you on. Another comment is, yeah, but you got a problem with your theory. What's that? Well, you got some data for your theory, and I'm not exactly sure where I would go to refute it. But you're asking me, implicit in your argument is you're asking me to believe in Middle Earth, Narnia, or if you want a secular example, Oz. You're asking me to believe in that. And there's no world like that. How do you know? Well, there's no, look, everything we know from empirical science, there's not an ultimate universe. And when I'm talking to a person like that, I always go, time out. Let's talk about near-death experiences. And because the evidence has been coming in so well, in a recent book, up to 30 million people in North America, England, and Europe have claimed to have near-death experiences. So I could say, hey, let's just say the number's blown up too much and there's only 20 million. In a way, that's 20 million people who've been to Narnia, if you want to look at it that way. So don't tell me there's no empirical evidence for this. And they'll say, yeah, those are just experiences. You don't have data. Well, you don't say that to me. I just gave a paper yesterday. I know of 300 evidenced NDE accounts where what's reported is empirically verified. So if you can't refute it, and it's almost impossible to refute the NDEs, if you can't refute them and you have this alternate reality, in what category? In the category of afterlife. Oh, so there may be an afterlife. Well, I didn't think so until today, but yeah, I guess maybe there is. Okay, now can we talk about resurrection? See, because I've opened the door to talk about this alternate reality, which may last forever. And you can't say anymore, yeah, but you're asking me to believe in Oz. Because I would say, I sure am, and I've got data for Oz.
So let's go over just briefly, and he presented some of these. And in other videos, I've seen him do kind of a 12-point minimalist approach to demonstrating the historicity of the resurrection. But these 11 here that I'm listing here are facts that most scholars, even if they are skeptics or critics, will accept as being historical. Number one, that Jesus did die as a result of crucifixion. It was Jesus on the cross. That this historical figure, Jesus of Nazareth, existed. They virtually universally agree, and virtually universally agree that we have enough historical evidence that he did die as a result of crucifixion on a Roman cross. That after that crucifixion, he was in fact buried in a tomb. Again, there are some who will say, no, he was buried in a ditch, a mass grave, or whatever. But the vast majority of scholarship, both pro and con, will concede that he was buried in a tomb. That at the point of his death and right immediately following his death, his followers were in despair. And they were obviously hopeless at this point because they had placed their faith in this messianic figure that they believed was the Messiah, and he was killed, and so they were in despair. However, the tomb that he had been laid in was found empty a couple of days later. Again, it is not widely disputed anymore at all that the tomb was empty on that first resurrection morning, that first Easter morning. It's really come down to explaining how the tomb got empty. It is, again, widely agreed, skeptics and believers alike, that these disciples who had been in despair and hopeless had experiences, some kind of an experience that led them to believe at least that a resurrection had occurred and that Jesus was then alive on the third day and thereafter, after he had been executed on the cross. And as a result of this experience, the disciples were transformed into courageous and bold and devout, believers claiming once again that they believed Jesus was not only the Messiah, but he was God incarnate. It's important to understand that this resurrection message that they were delivering was right away. So it wasn't as if it was a legend that grew over weeks, months, years, or decades. It was right away that they went around proclaiming the resurrection, and that they did so in Jerusalem, right where anybody who doubted could actually go and see whether the tomb was in fact empty. So it's important that they did this right there. And of course, it's accepted by skeptics and believers alike that this was when the church was born. As this group of now bold believers were going around proclaiming the resurrection of Jesus and that he was the Christ, the Messiah, and the Son of God. Even to the extent that these devout Jews changed the Sabbath. The Sabbath was established by God. when Moses was given the Ten Commandments and all of the laws were laid down. And so for them to change the day of worship, the Sabbath that had been established by God from Saturday to Sunday, had to have been something extraordinarily compelling for them to do that. Something like a resurrection of Jesus Christ. And then finally, Gary mentioned James, but it was also Jude. James and Jude were both physical brothers of Jesus, who were skeptical while he was before the crucifixion. But after the resurrection, they both became believers. And in fact, each have epistles or writings that have been accepted into the New Testament. Those writings were circulated to the church, and they both became leaders, in the church, even though they had begun as skeptics. And then, of course, we all know about Paul, who was originally named Saul, who was not only a skeptic, he was a persecutor of those who had come to believe in Jesus Christ, until he had his own personal encounter with the risen Christ and came to be a believer. This is also another brick, as Gary said, in terms of the foundation for why we can firmly believe. If you look at all the religions of the world, only Christianity really relies as its foundation so completely on a single historical person and a single historical event. And so again, as Paul said in Corinthians, Christianity and our faith rises and falls on the reliability and the validity of the historical and bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so we are fortunate that there is a substantial body of evidence that supports this particular claim. And again, I have only had time to brush the subject. I would encourage you to read more. And certainly there's no greater authority than Gary Habermas, but there are many others as well. And so our faith does rest on the shoulders of eyewitnesses and those bold attestations of what the original disciples and the apostles of Jesus Christ heard, saw, and experienced. So again, we can rest firmly on the faith that Jesus is who he said he was, that he did what he said he was going to do, and that the Bible gives us a reliable account of the events surrounding the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you look for our next summer short.